Hey everyone, welcome to Movie Marathons HQ, where we do movie marathons connected to new releases and where we enjoy and review some of our favorite movies. This video is part of the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, where we are watching one movie every week as we prepare for the release of Avengers Doomsday in December 2026. Today we are discussing The Avengers Age of Ultron. Released in 2015 and directed by Joss Whedon, this is the follow-up to the biggest movie of all time at that point. Overall, I really like this movie. I don't love it, and I do have a few issues with it, a few things that don't quite work for me. But overall, there's an awful lot that works well, and so we're going to get into it today. For positives, there is the expanded Avengers team, which includes a better role for Hawkeye, the reimagining and introduction of the Vision, and the introduction of the Maximoff twins. Also, Ultron as the villain by James Spader is a positive. The psychological attack against the Avengers by Wanda is another one. The Hulk versus Hulk Buster fight scene is really great and really fun, so that's another positive. And then I want to talk about a recurring theme where the Avengers themselves are the monsters of this story. I'll explain why I think that's a positive. And for negatives, I have a micro negative about Sokovia, and then full negatives of the Thor side quest and vision that he has, and then the Bruce and Natasha romance. Spoiler alert for the Avengers Age of Ultron. So the first positive I want to talk about is the expanded Avengers team. So in 2012, we were introduced to the Avengers, also directed by Joss Whedon, and we have 6 core Avengers heroes. In this movie, which is the follow-up, we get introduced to a few extra Avengers, and then a better role for one of them. So in this movie, Hawkeye has a lot more to do. In the original Avengers, he was taken over by the Mind Stone by Loki, so he was kind of a zombie throughout the whole thing. He comes back to himself towards the end, and you get a bit of personality, but he just kind of gets the short end of the stick in the Avengers. But here in Age of Ultron, he's got a lot more to do. He's seen as a leader. He's valuable to the team, even though they joke about him not being valuable. And then, of course, after Wanda does her psychological attack, which we're going to get into later, Barton is the only one who can kind of pull the team together, and he brings them back to his family home, which none of them knew that he had a family. And so he's kind of like the grounding presence, and I think it works really well. He's a human, one of the only humans on the team, and he doesn't really have superpowers or super training other than he's just a SHIELD agent who's got great skills with the bow and arrow. But in this, they use that to be the reason why he's the human one, and he can humanize the whole team of gods and aliens and stuff. I think it really works, and Jeremy Renner as Hawkeye really shines here. I think he does a great job. His wife is introduced, played by Linda Cardellini, and she's good too. The family scene really works back at the farmhouse. So I really like how the team is expanded with some new members, but also with him, we get more character development for Hawkeye. Next, we have the introduction of the Vision. I really like what they did here in Age of Ultron, where they took a well-known Avengers character from the comics, but reimagined him to fit the MCU. What I mean by that is in the comics, Vision is created by Hank Pym, and he's an android, and his brain waves are copied from Wonder Man. And it's like this weird comic booky origin. So you might say, the purists might say, that they wanted Vision to follow the origin from the comics, but in the MCU at this point, that wouldn't have made sense. At the time of recording this, Wonder Man has been introduced, but he was not even close to being introduced back then, and Hank Pym hadn't been introduced either. So what they did here was they had Tony Stark, played by Robert Downey Jr., as kind of the mad scientist who creates Ultron, and I think that works a lot better. Number one, he's one of our core Avengers, and the secondary leader of the team, I would say. But it kind of fits within the story of he feels like he wants to make a coat of armor, a suit of armor around the world to protect it, because that's his whole thing as Iron Man. And he thinks that AI is the way to do it. And so then they have Tony Stark as the kind of founder or creator of Ultron, and I think that works. There's a running theme there of he's created his own monster. And then I love that they take Jarvis, the operating system that Tony has been using since Iron Man 1 and that we've gotten to know and understand. I love that they use Jarvis as the operating system for the body that Ultron created for himself. Ultron gets the vibranium from Claw, played by Andy Serkis, and then in like a kind of random but cool role. So then this is Ultron's final form with vibranium, but then the operating system of Jarvis is able to take it over. I think that just works so well. And then on top of that, they have the Mind Stone, which in the comics he just has a gem in his forehead. It's not the Mind Stone. But then in this one, they take that out of the scepter, put it in him to give him a mind, which also works. And then Thor supercharges him with his lightning. I don't know if that's necessary, but it kind of helps him create it as well. And then finally, there's that amazing part where at the beginning of the movie, they're all having their little party scene trying to move Thor's hammer Mjolnir, and nobody can because nobody's worthy. But then right at the end, they're trying to see if they can trust the Vision that's been created because they don't know if he's Ultron or not. And then the Vision picks up Mjolnir and hands it to Thor, which just tells you that he's worthy to carry it. He's on the team. He's on the side of good. I think that whole reimagining and introduction of the Vision works really well. And then they get to take the voice actor for Jarvis, Paul Bettany, and he gets to suit up as the Vision. He's a very talented actor, so I think it just works perfectly, and that's definitely one of the main positives for this whole movie. We also get introduced to Wanda Maximoff and Pietro Maximoff, who are both well-known Avengers and kind of X-Men from the comics. Here they're played by Elizabeth Olsen and Aaron Taylor Johnson. I think they do a good job as the actors. Wanda more so than Pietro, but she's given more to do. I like that they are twins who come from Sokovia, and they have seen firsthand the destruction and damage that the Avengers, particularly Iron Man and Tony Stark, can inflict upon the world in the name of the greater good. So they have this vendetta against Tony and against the Avengers. So then Ultron is able to exploit that and have them on his team. Their powers are really different. They're not really explained well, other than they come from the Mind Stone, sort of. And Maria Hill, played by Kobe Smulders, says he's fast and she's weird. And that's really all the explanation you get, but visually it's interesting and different than the other characters. And then as Ultron's plan comes to light and they realize it's something that they morally can't stand behind, then they defect over to the Avengers. And I just think it works really well. It's too bad that Pietro ceases to be at the end of the movie, but his sacrifice does mean something. He had a running joke with Hawkeye, which kind of pays off. I didn't feel, and even in rewatch, I don't feel a lot of emotion when that character passes away. So I don't know why that is, but I still think it makes sense for that to happen, because how do you have a speedster on the Avengers forever? It kind of breaks a lot of plot elements. So he's introduced and then quickly taken away, but Wanda continues as an Avenger. So I think the expanded Avengers team is by far a major positive of Age of Ultron. I also really love the villain in this movie. So it's called Age of Ultron because Ultron is the villain. And Ultron is a classic Avengers villain from the comics. It makes sense that he would be the next villain for an Avengers movie. And here he's played by James Spader, whose freaky, sultry, mechanical, gravelly voice suits the character really, really well. I really like that Ultron's plan starts as he's learning about humanity through the internet, and he's looking at all of human history. And I like that his conclusion is, wow, humanity is the greatest threat to humanity. But he zeroes in on the Avengers first. And so then his plan starts to be he wants to make the Avengers extinct. But then over time, it evolves into, why stop at the Avengers? Let's just make all of humanity extinct. I think that makes sense. It's sort of an interesting anthropological question and morality question. So then here's this robot who's questioning it and acting on it. And I think that's really interesting. I don't love his design, to be honest. I do like him in the comics. They've got some really cool robot variations, the way that different artists have drawn him. I don't love how he looks in this movie. Something about he's got white in his pupils in his eyes, which probably visually helps. I bet they tried a lot of different things, and that's just what they ended with. It just is a little weird to me, and I really dislike that he has teeth. I don't understand why he would have teeth, and I don't understand why that looks better for him to have teeth. It just is creepy to me. They're not like individual chiclet teeth like humans have, but he does have like a row of metal teeth behind his lips, and it's just off-putting to me. So I don't love that. But I think he's pretty formidable, pretty scary. I think his plan makes sense. I understand why the Avengers need to stop him and why they're the only ones who can. And as I mentioned before, his creator being Tony Stark, I think, is really interesting and adds a complex layer on top of everything. But my favorite part of Ultron is, like, the final fight with him is not that memorable to me. I like that he makes a new version of his body, which is the Vision, and then the Avengers steal it, as we talked about it before. I think that's pretty cool and pretty creative. But yeah, his final fight and when they take him out is not that memorable to me compared to the final fight in the Avengers, which is very memorable against Loki and against all the Chitauri and the Evaders and stuff. But I do love the final Ultron bot who faces off against Vision, and they have a beautiful conversation. I love that Ultron and Vision, who are both robotic non-humans, are pontificating about humanity and what they've learned, and how they've both seen the same thing but come away with different conclusions. I really like the screenplay there and the dialogue that these two characters get into, especially when Vision tells Ultron that he missed that there's grace in their failings and that there is still something redeemable about humans, even though they are so flawed, whereas Ultron wanted perfection and upgrading as he's always wanted. And I absolutely adore the line where Ultron says to Vision, "You are unbearably naive." And Vision says, "Well, I was born yesterday." I think that is A+ script writing and really fun and a fitting conclusion to Ultron. So I think he's a fantastic villain. Hard to compare him with Loki because they are so different, but I think he's a fitting follow-up as an Avengers villain. Another positive is that they use Wanda Maximoff's power to get into the heads of the Avengers. Ultron says to Pietro, "You and I can hurt them, but you," meaning Wanda, "can destroy them from the inside." And I like that that's the approach they take. Joss Whedon had remarked after writing and directing the Avengers movie, essentially every hero in that movie just had punchy powers. And you could argue that, Iron Man doesn't punch a lot, but he does punch a lot, and he's blasting things out of his hands which are like a punch. And then Hawkeye shoots bows and arrows, which are like a long distance punch. So I like that they have a character now who's not as punchy. She's psychological and uses matter manipulation type stuff and telekinesis. And so I like that she kind of gets into every Avenger's mind, haunts them with images from their past, except for Hawkeye. And it destroys the team and kind of takes them all out of play, which sets up Hawkeye bringing them back to the farmhouse and doing some psychological healing there. So I really like that that's explored. There are some Easter eggs in the visions that all of them have, and of course it leads Hulk onto his rampage, which is my next positive. But I just like that aspect is explored, that all of these heroes, even though they are gold shining stars, they do have histories and issues. The most memorable fight scene in the movie for me is when Hulk faces off against Iron Man in the Hulk Buster suit. I think it's really, really cool. The visual effects are stunning. Throughout the whole movie, the visual effects are really good. But especially here, it's just so cool to see the Hulk totally rage out and totally lose control. And then Iron Man, who's built something specifically for this purpose, is there to neutralize the Hulk. I think it's really well done and really exhilarating as a scene. There's also a pretty cool Easter egg where in the Incredible Hulk movie, which, remember, that is the same Hulk as this one, even though it's a different actor and a different visual look to the Hulk. In that movie, his love interest is Betty Ross. And in this movie, the name for the Hulkbuster armor is Veronica. The reason for that is from the Archie comics, the two leading ladies are Betty and Veronica. And so Tony Stark called the Hulkbuster suit Veronica, presumably knowing about Bruce Banner's history with Betty. So that's why it's called Veronica. And even in the script, they say, call down Veronica. So very cool scene, really cool way to put the whole Iron Man suit inside another suit that is strong enough and large enough to take out the Hulk. So that's one of the most memorable fight scenes for me. And then a positive that I'd like to mention and discuss is a recurring theme that the Avengers are the monsters in this movie. I noticed this years ago, but this time through my rewatch for the Avengers Doomsday Movie Marathon, I went through this movie with a fine-tooth comb, and I noticed every time that a character is referred to as an Avenger. So essentially, Nick Fury created the Avengers as a group of heroes who could fight the battles that the rest of humanity never could. One could argue that they are a team of humans plus a god and a monster, being God, Thor being the god of thunder, and the monster being the Incredible Hulk. However, in this screenplay, almost every Avenger in this movie is referred to as a monster, but there's one who isn't, and it isn't the Hulk. So here are some examples. Steve Rogers says to Maria Hill, "Yeah, what kind of monster would let a German scientist experiment on them to protect their country?" referring to himself as the monster. Iron Man says to Bruce Banner, "We're mad scientists. We're monsters, buddy, and we've got to own that." This is a little bit of a cheat, but Heimdall says to Thor, "You're a destroyer, Odin's son." So not exactly a monster, but a destroyer. Black Widow says to Bruce, "You still think you're the only monster on the team?" referring to herself as a monster. Vision even says, "Maybe I am a monster," when he's talking to the Avengers before he grabs Mjolnir. So the ones who are not mentioned as monsters are Hawkeye from the original team, and then Wanda and Pietro, who are new to the team, are not. Nobody talks about them as if they're monsters, but so I think that's really interesting. But then finally at the end of the movie, when Captain America is rousing the troops before they're about to fight their last battle against Ultron and all the Ultron bots, Cap says, "Ultron thinks we're monsters, that we're what's wrong with the world. This isn't just about beating him, it's about whether he's right." I think that's a really powerful theme, that these characters who are our heroes view themselves as monsters. And the one who's not a monster is the most human one of us. So I really like that recurring theme. I've never heard anybody else talk about that. So sound off in the comments and let me know what you think, if you've ever noticed that, or what you think the implications might be of having that as a theme in the screenplay. I'd love to know your thoughts. Now for negatives, I have a micro negative that's just a small nitpick. So the country of Sokovia, which is fictional, but it's in Europe, presumably, is, you would assume it's either landlocked or mostly landlocked, but even if not, it's not an island, it's a country in the continent. And then Ultron's machine lifts the thing up out of the sky, and you would assume it's going straight up, right? Then at the end of the movie, when Thor hits it with a hammer and they blast it from the bottom and the top, and the whole thing disintegrates, Iron Man is seen underneath it dodging all the rocks, and he's right over top of water. It looks like an ocean of water, and all these rocks are splashing into water, and characters and mountains of rock are splashing into water. If you're a country in a continent, and if you lift it up straight, how would there be an ocean of water underneath you? I know that there's water tables underneath us all the time, but it looks like they're crashing over an ocean. Maybe it lifted and drifted, I don't know. But it's just a nitpick. That has always bothered me, that there's water underneath Sokovia when it lifts. The next negative is the Thor side quest and vision quest that he goes on. When Wanda gets into his mind, he kind of sees some weird stuff happening on Asgard. They get to the farmhouse with Hawkeye and his family, and then Thor leaves. He goes on a little quest with Eric Selvig from the first movie and from Thor, played by Stellan Skarsgård, and then he goes to like this ancient Norse bathhouse thing, and then he gets in the bath, and then he sees nice graphic design vision which has a bunch of infinity stones, and then he realizes, oh, the infinity stones are at the center of this, and then that vision that Ultron is creating is somehow important. So then he comes back and tells the Avengers that. it doesn't make sense within the movie, it doesn't make sense with this character. It really feels stuck in there by the studio to move things along towards Thanos and the Infinity War. And I get that that's what it needs to be. It just really takes you out of the movie and doesn't seem to fit the theme of the rest of the movie. So it's a negative for me. And then the last negative is the Bruce and Natasha romance. I'm not against there being a romance in the Avengers movies and even amongst the Avengers. I just think this whole romance doesn't work. So we have Bruce Banner, played by Mark Ruffalo, and we have Black Widow, played by Scarlett Johansson. They're both fine actors. They're both very strong, and their characters are unique. And I do sort of see why those characters might be romantically interested in each other, but it just feels forced. And then Black Widow has this whole thing where she can make the Hulk calm down, and that's an interesting element. But then this whole thing of will they, won't they? I just feel like they didn't have chemistry. They didn't have me rooting for them to get together like some other MCU couples have. And then at the end, he kind of rescues her from being taken hostage by Ultron, which I don't think really makes a lot of sense. And then why is Bruce Banner the one who saves her? But anyways, she tells him that she adores him. She kisses him, knocks him off the building, so he comes back as Hulk, which I don't understand the physics there. But that whole romance just doesn't work for me. It kind of screeches to a halt any momentum that the movie has, and then it has to pick up again after. And then when they bring the romance back in, it screeches to a halt again. So it really affects the pace of the movie, and I just don't think it works. And then it's fine to introduce that in one movie and not have it carry over, but it's just not mentioned again for the rest of the MCU. There's a couple little jokes about it, about their romance, but it's just a weird part of this movie that, for me, is the biggest negative of Age of Ultron. Now, how might the Avengers Age of Ultron connect to Avengers Doomsday? So at the timeline of this point, Tony Stark has passed away, but Robert Downey Jr. will be playing Victor Von Doom / Doctor Doom. So Tony Stark won't be in Doomsday, but RDJ will. Captain America, played by Steve Rogers, is old, and I don't think we're going to see him as an old man in Doomsday, but Chris Evans is confirmed to be returning, so he will be back in some role, I think as a variant of Captain America, if I were to guess. Thor is alive, and he's confirmed on the cast list. I think he's going to meet his end in Doomsday. And then Falcon, who has a brief role here, is also going to be in Doomsday. The Vision is no longer here. Wanda is no longer here. The Hulk is alive, but he's not on the cast list for Doomsday, though he is going to be in Spider-Man Brand New Day. Black Widow is no longer around, and Hawkeye is alive, but not on the cast list for Doomsday. So I think we are going to see some characters in and some characters not in. So that's my review of the Avengers Age of Ultron. What do you think of this movie, and how do you think it might connect to Avengers Doomsday? Make sure to let me know in the comments below. Follow Movie Marathons HQ on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and also on Letterboxd, where you can see all of the movie marathons we've done before and we have going on right now. The next movie in this marathon is Ant-Man. See you at the movies.